today's media-obsessed culture reigns almost supreme. One begs the question, has it always been this way? But this kind of political social manipulation is not just a postmodern phenomenon. I think as far back as the Elizabethan age, even further to some degree, I must say, massive and look to the performing arts and spectacle to achieve a state of complacency that disassociates them from the surroundings of the world. To this end, it has been continuously used as a form of political and social subservience, introducing a morality that fits the power bases of the age. I mean, Shakespeare's efforts to utilize the public vehemence of hatred towards the French resulted in Henry V, for example, him expounding out to meet the people and manipulate them to some degree or other. Now, at the end of the day, this was all instigated by and manipulated by Queen Elizabeth I, who was fighting wars on two fronts at the time, both in Ireland and Spain. The enemy was the one of the offending origin, but the objective was much the same. The objective here is to establish a rallying cry for fortitude within the people who were subjected to Essex's failure in Ireland. The directive was made even more urgent as the common men were conscripted to fight among the soldiers sent to the Emerald Isle. They needed to be distracted from this travesty. The famous speech, "We few, we happy few, we band of brothers, we revel in the memory of St. Crispin's Day," was one such speech designed to modulate and rouse the rabble into fortitude. Because the play desperately fails to lean to any one particular political perspective, it spoke to the masses in alehouses, privies, streets, homes, and other theatrical performance places, to such a degree that the rallying cry from malcontents was almost resounding. The desperation for revenge and victory is outlined in plays performed by the Chamberlain's men, even further by Hamlet, written in the same year. A desperate attempt to expound on patriotism and anger within the people for revenge and anger at their would-be oppressors. Such anger resounds even today with the crowds of various countries throughout the land towards those ostracized from acceptable society. We look on the efforts of aspiring performers in the X Factor and revel how much better we could do given the chance, and to disparage the efforts at the time. The same is similar of Love Island, where we look upon those displaying such incompetence. I mean, it's just hard to revel in sometimes. Really is. In pursuit of love, and consider how much easier it would if we were on the island to do the expected job ourselves. Everything is designed to instrumentalize and compartmentalize that which doesn't in fact exist. All the while, these would speak to our emotive behavior and succeed in their efforts. When Love's Labour's Lost was written a year before, in 1598, it was designed to incite desperation between differing outlooks within cultures and the way in which romance can be so fragile and misunderstood. A fair synopsis in the way in which imminent war could destroy any familiarity and companionship whatsoever. A fair difference to when the prospect of conflict cooled several years later in 1601. To highlight this difference in attitudes within the population, Romeo and Juliet was a good glimpse of required love, however short-lived, but it is with the former play we examine here. Rosalind's patrician view upon romance is limited, it seems, to an aspect akin to that which we see in reality media today. She said, "I conjure thee, by Rosalind's bright eyes, by her high forehead and her scarlet lip, by her fine foot, straight leg, and quivering thigh, and the diminishes in their adjacent lie, To be in love with Rosalind is to lie. Oh, dear me. Such a fecal attitude towards relations can be easily compared to the narcissism of Instagram today, or indeed even shows like Love Island that I mentioned formerly. Cleopatra and Julius Caesar are other clear indications of this attitude. Now, Simon Cowell, who recently stated that he feels his mind is more focused having not used his mobile phone for more than 3 months. 3 months! He just not used his mobile phone for 3 months. This is coming from a 70-year-old founder of one of the biggest reality shows out there. Of course, neither reality shows nor mobile phones are apparent in the 16th century, and they're definitely not apparent now, seeing we just passed legislation to combat youths on phones and internet devices. It's quite astounding. Other outlets of such frustration were dominant in the 16th century. The propagation of warfare was only one of them. Now, Queen Elizabeth I herself was abstinent all her life, despite findings that indicate her various affairs with the Earl of Essex and numerous others. Imagine the uproar if Instagram were available, or Pinterest for that matter. Now, it's estimated that 55% of phone users check their device within 15 minutes of waking up, while 41% believe their partner used their mobile too much. As the article said in BBC News recently, that's quite an alarming figure. Even the distraction of the play Othello, which was first produced in 1599 by Chamberlain's men, could not compete with that. It was in fact more propaganda material that was performed in front of the Queen herself at Richmond Palace that really got the gist. The gist of the material reflecting Elizabeth's own quandary of decision over not having an heir to the crown. The comparison over a foreign power being unsure of who would resume throne mirrored the proposed necessity of King James of Scotland taking the reign upon Queen Elizabeth's death. Yet another example of the propaganda machine that could be apparent even in 2026. Now, Shakespeare wrote Troilus and Cressida in 1598. Also, in it, Jacques texts his famous speech, which includes "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players." Now, this is indicative of what I'm trying to say here. Merely players, the men and women merely players. Merely players in what exactly? And upon whose instigation? Of course, the implications of this verse is obviously apparent even to the modern theatre goer. The end of the play is more morbid, but inciting the mood of the public even then. Even more so today. That end is strange. Eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, and sans taste. Sans everything. The predominance of the court manipulation can only be transferred to the predominance of governmental systems of postmodernism, but I'm afraid, I really am terribly afraid to say, it can't be eliminated. Shakespeare was a genius, but not even he bowed to the will of the people and his queen, as does Simon Cowell bow to the people. When the Globe Theatre burned down in 1603, William Shakespeare must have had such reminiscences that hark back to the death of his son, Hamlet, in 1516. Not only did this catastrophic impact have a catastrophic impact upon the way in which Shakespeare saw his works, it was also a devastating time for the people. No longer had they got their outlet for angelic occupations that allowed the focus on the prospect of invasion to flourish. It was no longer a scene, it had to become an arms race once again. A tempest, if you might, or the Tempest. Now, such a formula for a play struck Will's mind, and he began to write what might be regarded as one of his most ambitious prospects. The marooning on an outlet island of a girl and a father was an outlet for his own troubles, perhaps. Family life in Stratford had never been entirely kind to him, although he might have persevered with it. Family legacies in the 16th century weren't that great, and the acquisition of legal wills was even sparser. It was throughout his life Shakespeare felt ostracized to a certain extent, and this probably lent his mind towards the burgeoning genius we know today. The burgeoning genius that actually instigated all of this stuff and caught Queen Elizabeth's eye so that she could manipulate him to propagate her war machine. Coleridge wrote, Shakespeare was exactly as if of another planet, the first scholar to tackle him. Shakespeare tried to establish a progress of order according to Queen Elizabeth's strictures. Francis Bacon said, Shakespeare wanted personal aggrandizement than merits towards the public. He referred everything to himself and was himself true and perfect in the centre of his own actions. It was intact at the theatre that absorbed social energies, such like today in fact. For instance, Julius Caesar was compared to Elizabeth's subjects in that they were disabled and powerless, and Rome was compared to Elizabethan London in this particular instance that Shakespeare wrote, even to the extent of the Queen staging a triumph. This caused the reputation of the company to be in debate, defending the honour of the realm. Hugh Holland stood on an altar like Julius Caesar on Ascension Day. If only some politician would convincingly defend such honour today in the wake of Brexit and the Chequers Agreement. Where are we going but total subservience with media that no longer makes us think but propagates the continual arms race? For instance, Thomas Platter said Caesar was very pleasingly performed, creating an uproar. The Archbishop indicated that several prayers used to combat the Spanish Armada. Perhaps Simon Cowell could take over arranging trade agreements instead of Trump. That would compromise the country after day, even in 2076. It might indeed work.
Yes, yes, it is very serious indeed.
I don't know. Give us a good clicking.
Shakanaka.